Welcome to The Breakdown with INFB. We're your hosts, Garrett Kelly
and Heidi Gant.
On today's episode, we're kicking off an eventful season at Indiana Farm Bureau with the start of the 2025 Indiana General Assembly. Engaging in policy is a foundation of Farm Bureau membership, and there's no shortage of issues on the docket this year that could impact agriculture.
So today we brought two of our policy experts and INFB leaders to the podcast to give us a rundown of what to expect in the coming months and how members can get involved. Randy Kron is the president of Indiana Farm Bureau, who also farms in southern Indiana, and Andy Tower is the executive director of public policy for INFB. Randy and Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Heidi and Garrett.
Happy to be here today.
Yes, thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. President Kron, I think it would be helpful for listeners if we start a little bit of background on how our policy development process works here at Farm Bureau. How do those become priority topics that we focus on during the year in session? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. We talk a lot about grassroots, but really our policy process starts at the county level. All 92 counties have a, whether you call it an issue meeting, policy meeting, to talk about what's important, what's relevant, and what's going on. So those counties will have those discussions. Then they will have a policy meeting where they'll have votes on whether the county supports a certain policy, whether, it might be water, could be taxes, could be a lot of different things. So from the counties, then it moves up to the state level, and we would have a resolutions committee that will look at all the resolutions. Somewhere 400 to 500 of them come in from all around the state. But then they'll take those and try to meld them together and have a recommendation that will go in front of our delegate body. About 260 delegates from across the state will come together for one day and have debate and discussion about our policy. So it is truly grassroots driven. And, I would encourage anybody that if you are interested in policy, I would encourage you to get engaged at our county level and talk about these issues. But that's how our policy is set. It's not here at the state level. Myself or officers or our board does not set the policies. They are set from the grassroots.
And so I know you guys have been out through counties all year this year and since delegate session and meeting with counties. What have you heard? What are the biggest things that came out of that, the biggest topics that we all want to focus on this year?
Well, I think before we jump into there, a couple other things that are important about the overall process. And one of them was new this year. We asked our counties to identify and submit back to us their three priority policies. And so this year we had all 92 counties send those back to us. And so we used those, coupled with what we heard through the resolutions delegate body, to have the discussion with the board of directors to ultimately establish those priorities. And probably no surprise to many of our listeners, property taxes and water came to the top of the list really easily. I think of all of our 92 counties, I think each of those had roughly 40 counties identified those as priority issues. So ultimately that's what the board of directors decided to establish as their priorities. But I think the other thing, the overarching piece of that is, how do we protect farmers, keep farmers farming, and with, sound property tax reform, water protections, those are some opportunities for some long-term protections, keep our members at home on the farm and being able to viable to the next generation.
In a little more, sorry, President Kron, go ahead.
No, I would just follow up on Andy's comments. As I've been out having roundtables with county presidents and attending a lot of annual meetings, the water issue, over the past years, water has been, we talk about water quality, but quantity. The Leak District has spurred that, and we're having a lot of those discussions. Property taxes come up everywhere I go, and land use is another one of those that come up, and, concern about solar, different issues like that. But there is no shortage of issues for our members right now, and they're having a lot of discussions.
This may change throughout session, but when we think of some of those top issues, water, property taxes, what are some of those asks that might need to come from members?
I think, one, we need members to show up. When we talk our priorities, which really came from what the county sent us, but on the water and the property tax, those are two huge lifts. And normally we would have one of those. To have two of them in 1 year just tells you how big they are. And it's going to take our members showing up, talking to legislators. You know, we've got several new ones. I think there's about a dozen new ones in the State House. We need relationships with them, and those relationships are our local members in the county having relationships and talking to them and telling them why water protection is important to ag and how their property taxes have gone up. So those are things, this is grassroots, we're a grassroots organization, and our clout at the State House comes from our county level. And I want to emphasize that if we get things passed, it's because our members have showed up and been heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to build on that even further, it's terms of explicit asks that when we get to the General Assembly, and hopefully as our members are having those conversations with their elected officials when they're back home in district, from a tax perspective, we're asking for a modernization of the farmland formula, because one of the things that is just the way the formula is today, there's some areas where we can improve that, and so we'll be working to modernize that, as well as looking at increasing the cap rate, because it's currently set at 8%. Now that we've gotten into this inflationary period and higher interest rates, that 8% really doesn't provide the buffer that it did when we put that in place. So those will be the two big asks in terms of farmland formula, in terms of property tax. Now, the caveat with all that, because our members also talk about rural viability, and property tax does not go to the state general fund. Those are local tax dollars to be used on local services. And so we know going in, and we've heard from Speaker Houston and others in leadership, we're going to have to find that balance, because if we continue to want to have, schools, police, fire, all the things at a local government, we're going to have to find a balance there. And so the tax conversation, I anticipate, is going to be one of the toughest ones we have this session. I mean, we'll likely won't see what that looks like until the absolute end of the legislative session, but it'll be a very important conversation, as President Kron said. And so just those member stories about what their property taxes, how they've increased over the last couple of years, because I believe, really for farmland, we've saw a 17% increase in 2023, about a 26.5% increase here in 24, and estimating another 25 or 20% increase going into 2025. And so, that's all happening as Randy back home on the farm. I mean, net farm income is going the opposite way pretty fast as we're seeing those increases. So those stories will resonate with the members of the General Assembly. And as President Kron alluded to, a dozen or so brand new freshman members of the General Assembly, they need to hear those stories as well.
And I would add to that, when you think about the increases Andy just talked about, 16 to 25+%, nobody's property tax should go up that much in 1 year. So there's got to be some restraint. But I do hear, as I'm out, our members, they want the fire trucks to show up when you got a fire, the medico, they want the sheriff. So there are demands at the county level that we need to be able to fund. Part of the question is, we need to get a handle on this to start with and get it under control, but then later there needs to be a discussion, what's the right way to fund local government?
Mm-hmm. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that it's a budget year. So how does that play into all of this? I know there's going to be a lot of asks from a lot of people. Andy, how does that play into some of our asks?
So I think it's going to make it very difficult. I think as we've visited with folks and visited with Katrina Hall and our team, this is going to be one of the toughest budget conversations we've had over at the Indiana General Assembly in quite some time. Our revenue forecast here as we get late into 2024 and into 25 have been coming in short. Last year the state identified a Medicaid shortfall, and so all that means, we're going to have a tighter budget. And so I anticipate, the Medicaid conversation will be the first thing they try to address. We've heard other folks mention, K through 12 funding will be the next 51%. Then you get higher ed, and then all the other state agencies and everything else is fighting for what's left over. And so it's going to make it really difficult, and some tough conversations. And there'll have to be a lot of give and take and some compromise along the way. But, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure Indiana stays in strong fiscal footing, because when we do issue bonds, having that AAA rating allows us to be able to do some additional things, but there's going to be some really tough conversations in terms of budget and tax conversation as a whole.
I think reality is there's not going to be a lot of yes. There's probably going to be a number of no's on this budget because they don't have the money. And the legislature has showed they're fiscally pretty conservative and they want to have a reserve, and that means there's going to have to be some no's. And I'm going to come back to that's where members are going to make a difference. If they show up and be heard, maybe we can move some of ours to the yes side.
Yes. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's one of the things that, we've learned over the years, and we learned loud and clear this summer through some activities that the members of the General Assembly really appreciate Farm Bureau's voice and hearing from our members, because when they show up, whether it's at the State House or back home at a coffee shop or third house, our members are very respectful and are willing to sit down and have those tough conversations. And so, as President Kron alluded to, we need our members' voice.
Now, on a positive side, we had Speaker Houston to our board meeting here just a week or so ago, and he did bring up pretty early in his comments about protections of water. They would do no harm to agriculture, so that's a good start. And he also brought up about property tax, understanding it. So they've heard enough to know what our issues are. Now we got to get them to what's the solutions.
That's great. Building those relationships is important. And it's also going to be another wrinkle in this session. We got a new administration coming off the big election in November. So what are your thoughts on working with Governor-elect Braun as he moves into his governorship here, building those relationships? What's that look like for agriculture?
I feel good about it. He owns some farmland. He's got a little knowledge about agriculture, which is helpful. But we've had multiple meetings with him and some of his staff, and trying to make sure they understand what our priorities are. And I'm hopeful there, and I think he will be good for agriculture. But, the proof's in the pudding as we come along here and see what happens. There will have to be some tough decisions. But our meetings so far that we've had, I've left with good feelings. And I think overall he's supportive of ag. He understands how important agriculture is to Indiana's economy statewide, and he wants to make sure we maintain that. So I don't want to get ahead of our skis here, but I think we will be in fairly good shape. But sometimes there will be hard decisions to make.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's, very encouraging through the campaign and through our conversations with Governor-elect Braun and his team leading up to the election. Property taxes was always the number one issue that he led with as well. And so the fact that that is on his radar as well, without us even making the ask, I think is very positive. And when we met with him as well, he was very aware of our water concerns and looking for opportunities to be able to further protect agriculture's investment in water and access to water. So as like President Kron said, I think we're encouraged that we'll be able to find a lot of common ground with he and his team as they start to take shape and we get into the new session.
A bonus here, or a little plus with Governor-elect, I tried to say Senator Braun, but Governor-elect, got to transition here a little bit. But he owns some farmland, or a considerable amount of farmland in southwest Indiana. A lot of it has irrigation on it. So I think that helps when the farmers that are farming his ground are explaining it to him too. He's getting it a little more firsthand, understanding the capital investment, what they do, how important it is for yields in the crops. So that gives us a little extra knowledge on his side to understand how this works.
Yeah, and I think, and even pulling on that string a little bit more, being from Jasper area, we've got a huge poultry interest down there in that part of the state. So I know he's has relationships with those folks, and knowing, what water means to our livestock production here in the state of Indiana as well. And so not only for raising the animals in the barns, but then the water we ultimately need for the processing facilities to drive that value add. So again, I think we're in a good position. But as President Kron alluded to, there's going to be some tough conversations and ultimately some compromise along the way.
So we've talked about state issues, but we also work a lot with our federal friends. So what are some of those top issues that we're focused on in D.C. this year?
Well, there's probably two that percolate to the top pretty quick. One would be trying to get a farm bill over the finish line. we were hopeful lame duck might get that done, but now that Republicans have taken the White House in both chambers, they're probably going to want to write their own farm bill. So that's going to wait till after first of the year. The trouble is, new Congress, you start over, new committee hearings, new markups. That's going to be a lengthy process to get through. So trying to figure out a farm bill, some certainty. We said earlier, the farm economy margins are tight, especially on the row crop side of things, really tight. So we need some certainty on a farm bill, and we will be pushing for that. I mean, we've had conversations with Chairman Thompson, and I assume he will stay chairman. And we'll see on the Democrat side who's going to be ranking member there. But farm bill is very important. The other one is what I referred to quite often, 2017 tax cuts, or the Trump tax cuts, however you want to refer to them. There's a lot of impact to agriculture there, estate taxes, and getting a permanent fix to that, because they're due to expire the end of 25, and could have huge impacts on agriculture there. So those are two big lifts that we'll be working on, and then some other things that come up, and a lot of discussion about balancing the budget. So there's some cuts, so we'll have to figure that all out. But that's what our focus will be, at least at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I think those two will, I mean, especially in terms of the next Congress. I think a couple other issues that we may have to do some work on more from some executive order action is trade. This is something, the current Biden administration really hasn't done a whole lot in terms of trade. Actually, they've kind of carried forward a lot of Trump's former policies from Trump 45, but, he's talked about tariffs not only on China, but here recently tariffs on both Mexico and Canada. Right there are three biggest ag trading partners. And so that's going to be a conversation that we're going to have to lean into, because, again, Indiana being the state that we are, we depend on a lot of trade, whether it be for our row crop, agriculture, our livestock products. And those three markets are huge to what we grow here in Indiana. And so that'll be very, very important. And the other one that is probably going to be a tougher conversation, a longer conversation, but is ag labor. That continues to be an issue on a federal side that we continue to hear concerns from our members. We just saw some new labor rates for H-2As come out, and Indiana took one of the largest increases across the country in terms of what those labor rates are going to be in 2025. So again, and just the overall profitability of agriculture, that's going to be another piece of that puzzle as that Trump administration gets put together, that we're going to have some conversations early and often.
That's great. So clearly no shortage of issues that affect Indiana communities, farmers, right down to their bottom line, and a lot of things that our members will be working on throughout 2025. President Kron, if someone's listening to this and they're getting fired up for advocacy and kind of finding their voice in this process, how do they get started with that in Farm Bureau?
I'd be one, County Farm Bureau. We talk about our grassroots. Reach out to your County Farm Bureau. You can call the state office. We'd be happy to tell you who the county president is or who the regional manager is that takes care of those counties. And I would encourage them to do that, because we need a voice. We need to be advocates. If you're not stepping up, somebody else will be telling your story, and I guarantee you they're not helping or working on your best interest. And so I would ask them, and I get quite often, it's like, well, I'm busy. You just keep doing what you're doing, and it'll all be good. And no, it won't. There's too few of us, and we need to have our voice heard, whether it's Farm Bill, whether it's labor, it's the tax things, or here at the State House. So I would encourage them to reach out. Please, if you're involved in agriculture, you need to have your voice heard.
Yeah, come join us in Indiana, come join us in Indianapolis at the State House.
Yeah, and to kind of tie into that, I think the other thing that our listeners need to understand, I mean, even here at Indiana at the General Assembly, I think we have 2 full-time farmers as members of the Indiana General Assembly. So
we just gained one. We doubled the number.
Yep, absolutely. So we've got 2 out of 150. And then as we look to D.C., there's very few members of the congressional delegation that can go back home and put their hands in the dirt. And so that's where, those voices and new members engaging in the process, and just getting involved in the advocacy work is so important for not only today, but really setting up for 10, 20 years down the road.
And then, Andy, where can people go for more information during session and about what we're doing and about how to get involved?
Sure, absolutely. And so I think as we turn to session, our team, the public policy team here in Indiana, will every Friday at noon, we'll have a Friday legislative update call. If you don't automatically get the email link to that, reach out to somebody here at the home office, county president, the field ops team. We can get you connected there, as well as we every Friday during the session we'll send out what we call our Friday dispatch, which is an update kind of all the happenings the previous week at the State House, as well as a little bit of a preview for the next week. And so those will be kind of the primary ways to stay engaged with us through the legislative session, or always check our website, or don't hesitate to pick up a phone, call somebody at the policy team or our field ops team. We'll get you connected.
Perfect. Well, that was relatively painless, I hope. Thank you both for joining us, and hopefully we have a successful session at the General Assembly this year.
Nope, thank you.
Thank you, Garrett, Heidi.
If you enjoyed our conversation today, make sure to subscribe to The Breakdown with INFB and even rate and review us to let us know how we're doing. For more information, visit www.infb.org/podcast.